Good evening, one and all. If you are joining us as a guest from Scole Academy, I'm Joylyn Blake and I'm the director of Scole Academy. Or if you are joining us as a guest of Classical U or Classical Academic Press or a fan of Circe, all people are welcome this evening for this great live learning event. We have a very special guest. Monique Neal comes to us this evening with a wealth of experience in the language of Greek, and we're going to get to that. But before we do, I like to offer just a few announcements as we get started, and then I will quickly hand it off to Monique, and she'll take us through some of her techniques and otherwise for the study of Greek. So, for starters, I wanted to just again say welcome if you're joining us from whatever form you found your way to us. We're so happy that you're here, whether you're parent, student, teacher, community, or school leader. We're just glad you're here. And we want to extend to you a warm welcome to get to know us better at Classical Academic Press. We're honored to serve families and educators like yourself. And we offer a host of training courses, things like this evening's live learning event. And we co-sponsor this with other arms of our services like Scole Communities. That's our network of homeschool and hybrid communities. And like I said, Scole Academy, which is our K-12 online course provider. We've hosted various lecture halls and so forth. So we like to just bring fascinating speakers together who can lend their perspective and their expertise in restoring to our classroom and family cultures the traditions of a liberal arts education. So we're just going to pause here quickly to allow for other participants who are joining us a little late. We're going to give just a couple of minutes of pause here as you get set and as you start to think about what you may hear this evening. We invite you to populate the Q&A box, the question and answer box, with any questions that you might have that might come to mind. And I and our guest, Miss Neal, will do our best to address those at the end of tonight's conversation. Right? So just familiarize yourself with those features on Zoom and find the Q&A box, and you're welcome to, like I said, at any time in the evening, if anything occurs to you, intrigues you, fascinates you, want to probe further, just pop that question in the Q&A box. All right. So um, as you consider tonight's event and the things that it inspires you to learn more about, I just want to reiterate that we have professional development offerings during the summer and in the coming school year. We have a host of teacher training courses and your leadership teams, if you're serving in a school or otherwise, can access those at classicalu.com. I'll put some of these links in the chat a little later on so that you can explore these opportunities yourself. We also have a consultant for PD, and that is available to you through Classical U. And then we have a classical teaching and writing symposium. So all of these things are opportunities for you to get to know us better and enjoy the multiple trainings that we have to offer. And I'm so glad that the person who we have been longing to see has just popped in with us, Dr. Christopher Perrin. I'll hand it off to him in just 1 second. But he can tell you a little bit more about the services that Classical Academic Press has to offer. And I will just put my own little blurb in here for Scole Academy, one of the service lines of Classical Academic Press. We offer live, fun online instruction that is characterized by a restful approach to classical studies. And we offer this in all levels of students, but particularly for grades 3 through 12. And you can visit our all courses page to see what all is available there in the academic year or during our summer programs, which are lots of fun and no grades. So I invite you to get to know that better. And last but not least, I wanted to invite you to familiarize yourself with our Scole communities. I will give you the link to the Skull Lake Community's website. And like I said, that is a community of folks who believe in classical education, believe in the merit and the worth of ministering in our homeschooling lives, both to our children and to one another. And it's a great place to connect with people who are like-minded. So as the evening goes on, I'll give you an opportunity to explore some of those by sharing some of those resources in the chat. But now, without further ado, I am going to hand it off to the one and only Dr. Christopher Perrin, who will provide Monique's formal introduction and offer her bio, and then they will get started, and I will slip into the background. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Blake, also known as Joy Lynn. Thank you for joining us this evening. I really appreciate your time and your interest. You know, we are about trying to retrieve and renew some of the best things that have been kind of curated for us in the human past. And language is one of those things. If you think about it, a tradition is something that has been passed down. Um, it's what it means from the Latin. Tradere in Latin means to hand over, to hand down. Even it can even mean to surrender. A tradition is something that you've received that is important enough that you want to keep it, care for it, and give it to somebody else to pass it on. You might have Christmas traditions. They might be things that are, family traditions. But language itself is a tradition. Someone has passed down to you the language that you speak. Someone has taken the time, probably lots of people, preeminently your parents, your family, but people took time when you were a child to point things to you and to say over and over to you, that is a cat. Do you like that cat? What a lovely cat that is. And eventually you would say cat. I can remember as I'm speaking, my daughter, my oldest child, Zoe, and her early language acquisition. And remember, holding her as a baby and having a cup of coffee or a hot tea in my hand. And of course, what does a 9-month-old baby want to do but to reach for whatever it is that you have in your hand? And I would say, no, 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 Zoe, it's hot. This is hot. And I remember being so surprised when she was not yet 1, when she said hot in her little baby voice, one of her first words, after, of course, mama. And that was you too. You acquired these words. Well, I'm supposed to introduce Monique, but Monique has the double pleasure of not only receiving as a gift and tradition the English language, but the Greek language too. She is bilingual. And do you know what that means? It means that she speaks 2 languages. And you know what trilingual means? It means that you can speak 3 languages. And do you know what we call somebody who speaks just 1 language? An American. Okay, that's a joke. But it is true. Europeans often speak multiple languages, and Monique is one of those who's received a double tradition of both Greek and English. Wouldn't you like to be her? So Monique has grown up with these 2 languages, and she loves both of them, and she has the ability to pass on to her children and to others not just 1 language but 2. And the Greek language is a storied old language. Hesiod, Homer, going back to 700, 800 BC, were written in this Greek language. And Greek was around before the language I'm speaking. Greek was around before English. Greek has contributed words to English, some 20, 30%. Now, I got to study Greek too, but I didn't get to receive it as a spoken language like Monique. I didn't start studying it till I was 18, and I studied it to read it, not to speak it. but I wish I had learned to speak it. I wish I had learned it the way she did. And so it's a pleasure to introduce you to Monique, uh, a mother, a teacher, an educator, and a linguist. I have met her and her family at the church that she attends in Richmond. It just so happens that my son lives in Richmond as well and attends the same church that she does. So I've seen her lovely family. I've seen her kids. I enjoy talking with her kids, and I just respect Monique very much. She's teaching Greek already to a number of people. She's able to do that online, and of course, she's able to do it in person as well. So please welcome Monique Neal to this conversation. Monique, I don't see you, but I know you're there.
Oh, do you not see me? Okay, well,
Oh,
I see you. I see you, and wow, yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm just delighted to be here, speaking with you and you all this evening. So truly, thank you.
and
Um,
before you start, do you just tell us a little about your family? I know your husband is John, and I remember I met Christopher and I met Rebecca, and I'm forgetting the names of some of your other kids. But tell us a little bit about your family and work before you do anything.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm a homeschooling mom. We have 4 children. Our oldest is Maria, and she's 15. Christopher's 12. Andrew is about to turn 11, and Rebecca, the baby of the family, is 8 already. I can't believe it. Everyone in our family learns Greek. Everyone also learns Latin. Everyone thinks Greek is easy, and everyone thinks Latin is so hard. The only people that think that. They're like, "Latin is so hard." Really? I love
That
that.
makes
I
it
love it.
when when you get to learn your mother's tongue, it does seem to be easier.
Right, right, right. So they're just fun. They're so fun. I most days I absolutely love what we're doing. It's just a joy.
Tell
Um,
tell us a little bit about your own parents and your own family, and what it was like for you to learn Greek and English.
yeah, so I grew up, my parents are immigrants. Um, My parents were both born in Cyprus. They met in London and then they moved here in 1971. And so I was born here, but to immigrant parents who insisted that we speak Greek in the house, which growing up, I always felt like, why are we so strange? And I always have to speak Greek. But oh my goodness, I'm so thankful for that. Not just now, but I think even as a young person, while I was still at home, I was very thankful for that. Um, but yes, I grew up learning both languages from a young age, and when I went to school, I confused the words for a little while and spoke a little in English and a little in Greek, but that quickly sorts itself out.
Mhm.
And then I started studying ancient Greek only in 2020.
Mm.
Um, so yes, I love Greek. I
Mm.
love Greek, ancient, modern, everything in between, in all its variations, over time and place. I love the language.
Tell us, give us some examples of what's lovely about Greek.
Mm,
Here
mhm,
you get this question from time to time from your students. Why should I learn Greek? And of course, you can give those practical answers. It's
yeah,
great if you want to become a doctor or a scientist, etc.
right.
Of course, it's lovely to say you could, read the New Testament in the original. But you said that it's lovely. There's something about it
Mm,
that you love. So, apart from its practical utility,
mhm.
what is lovely about Greek?
Oh, it's so lovely. Well, so here's the first thing I would say. The first thing I would say is that it is the language of Homer, right?
Mm.
And Plato, right? And Aristotle and Thucydides and Plutarch and the church fathers, right?
Mhm.
And Holy Scripture. Um, and because of that, there's something so I mean, this language, for better or worse, call it chance, call it divine providence, it holds our heritage, right?
Mm,
All of these authors, right, whose works form the foundation of our culture and our faith, all of these works were written in Greek. And
mm,
so, for me, when somebody says, why should I speak Greek? This is the reason. And
mm,
there was, I mean, it's only recently that we ask this question, I think, right? I
mm,
think that, you know, for back in antiquity, late antiquity, the Byzantines, the Renaissance, probably up until um, even in C.S. Lewis's time, so probably up until the early 20th century, there was this belief that um a meaningful interaction with these texts and with the authors required reading and being able to interact with the texts without an intermediary, right? Without a translator.
mhm,
Um, and that makes sense, right? Even if you trust a translator, and that is a question, but even if you trust a translator, there's still so much, there's such a limit to translation. And of course, the more we want to be able to translate it, the more impossible it is. The things that we most want to convey in translation are just not possible to convey.
mhm,
So um so we want to learn this language, so that we can read these texts. I think that's the, for me at least, I think that's the first thing, right? We talk about learning Greek as a spoken language, but I don't think that's the telos, right? This is not the end. We do it as a means to efficiently come up the curve so that we can read these texts in the original, right? And not just be instructed by what is being said, but precisely how it's being said. So
mm,
somebody doesn't need to tell us, okay, I'm going to tell you what Plato is saying. Right? We can actually hear Plato's words, in as he said them, right? Um, there is something. Um, there's more though. Greek is a beautiful language. For example, when we when we express ourselves in English, there is no way to do that without being in time, right?
mhm,
I need to use verbs, and all of my verbs have tense. I have to place myself either in the past or the present or the future. I have
mm,
no other choice, right? But in Greek, there's the aorist. And
mhm,
the aorist is timeless. It has no time. It exists
mm,
without time. It
mm,
talks more about how something is done, what we call aspect, than when it's done. And the aorist is predominantly how the Greeks communicated. So think
mm,
about that. Think
mm,
about being able to express yourself in a way that's just kind of outside time, that
mm,
talks more about how something is done as
mm,
opposed to when it's done. That's
mm,
beautiful,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, I'm thinking as well, like the use of the imperative, because there's the present imperative, which you have in Greek, which would give a command that is supposed to be continuous, right?
Hmm.
That would be an example for when Paul tells us to love one another in the Greek. He's telling us to love and to keep on loving.
Hmm.
And well, I wonder if you wouldn't mind. Let's illustrate this in some way. Um, would you? Now, I'm going to recite to you John 1:1 as I learned it, as without being. I don't speak modern Greek, but I wonder if you even have your New Testament handy. Do you?
Yeah,
You can,
I do. I'd have to get up and get it from right in the
okay,
other room, but I could do
you
that.
you
Let's do it.
you get
Okay,
yours.
okay, let's do that.
Mine's downstairs. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay.
So the other thing I just wanted to mention, Chris, is that I prepared a short lesson
Ah, excellent.
because I didn't want to just tell people, oh, the spoken method is more efficient and it gets you up the curve quicker. And I wanted to demonstrate it, right?
Perfect.
So if you are willing to be my student, I'm
Yes.
actually going to demonstrate some aorist commands.
Oh, excellent.
So yeah, so
That,
let's make
that's
sure to leave time for that.
all right. Good. I'll be quick here with this, and then we'll just turn that over to you for a lesson. Would be excellent. But I think it would. One of the beautiful things about Greek is also its sounds, its phonetic.
Mm,
So I'm gonna, and then maybe we could just do a little bit of exegesis because I know you're going to say some really interesting things about translation, and you've already mentioned that something is lost when we have to translate.
mm, mhm,
Imagine if you translate Shakespeare into a,
mm,
what do the Spanish think about Shakespeare when they have to read him
right,
in Spanish? We would think, oh, you're missing something. Those
right.
turns of phrase that Shakespeare uses, and when you mentioned Homer's verse, it's beautiful poetry. It has a lilt, a rhythm, a sound, and and the same thing is true even if the biblical Greek has its own rhythm and sounds that you
Yeah,
know
for
you,
sure,
you
for
don't get to
sure.
enjoy. So
Well,
I'm going.
and especially Greek, because Greek was a very musical language, right?
Mhm,
And all of the diacritics that we look at, um, with the breathing marks and the accent marks, they weren't stress marks, right? They were more pitch marks.
mhm,
So with the vowels, we have long and short vowels, which kind of give us the lengths of the notes, if you will. And then we have marks that tell us should we go up in tone or down in tone. And
mhm,
so if you think about poetry like Homer's, it would have sounded musical. It would
yeah,
have had a cadence and a musicality to it, and there would have been a feeling associated with that, with the tones of his poetry. And this is something that, I mean, even scholars who study this, we don't know exactly how it sounded, but certainly when we read it in the original and we speak it and we hear it, we are approaching it. We are approaching a little closer to how his audiences would have experienced it. And the other thing that might surprise people is I think it's more clear to us when we talk about poetry that there's something that we're losing in translation. But
mhm,
even with homilies that are written by the church fathers, there is so much we're missing in translation because of what they do in terms of playing with a lot of the pre-Christian Hellenic writing. So a lot of these authors, they would incorporate Homeric words very thoughtfully to make certain associations. Now, this is something that there's no way for us to communicate. At best, it's a footnote, but you just can't bring that forward in a translation.
yeah,
And this is something I love to talk about, and I love discovering every time I see new instances of it. it's clear to me. It certainly would have been clear to the audiences at the time that, the church fathers are drawing on Homer, and they're
Yeah.
drawing on the, pre-Christian lyrical poets, right? And then you have to ask the question, well, why? Because a lot of the Christian folk at the time didn't like the pre-Christians, right? um, and so there's so much more instruction there, I think,
Yeah.
when you're reading it in the original, right?
It was, I was recently leading a small class we were reading Basil's letter to young men studying Greek literature, and
Yes.
his first chapter, he's quick to quote Hesiod, the
Mm,
oldest Greek writer that we have. He just drops in a famous aphorism from Hesiod about learning from
right.
your following
Right.
follow the moral path, and
Yes.
um, yeah, that was their literature, their language, and they transformed it, of course, as Christians, as Basil did.
Yeah.
But it fills their writing, just like we as English speakers, we probably use more phrases from Shakespeare than we even are aware of. But when Shakespeare says, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not altars.
Mm,
Love doesn't alter when an alteration finds. You hear that pentameter, that iambic pentameter. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love does not alter when it alteration finds. We love, we even if we don't recognize it, we're enjoying that rhythm, that music. So we know it as English speakers, but it exists in Greek as well. And so there's a poetic pleasure waiting for people who study Greek. But
yes.
wait, there's more. So let's
Yes.
let's see where you take
Yes.
it. Let's just
Yes.
look.
Yes, for sure.
So I'm going to read it with the Erasmian translation, and then I would love to just hear you read it and let the music. Uh, I wonder what harmonies our listeners will hear when you read it compared to me, because I'm going to butcher it, and 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 they'll note the difference.
No, you won't.
I won't try to perfect, but I'll use a different pronunciation. This is John 1:1. Inarche ein hologas, kai hologas ein proston thean, kai theas ein hologas. Hotos ein in arche proston thean, panta di autu egenito, kai chorus autu egenito ude in hogigonen. En auto zoe ein, kai he zoe ein tophos ton anthropo, kai tophos in te scotia fine, kai he scotia auto u katelaben.
Calista. Calista. Very well done. Very well done. Very
Thank
good.
you. Let's hear you.
Would you like me to read it in Eraspian or in the Byzantine, the modern pronunciation?
The Byzantine.
Mm-hmm. En αρχή είναι ο λόγος, και ο λόγος είναι προς τον Θεόν, και Θεός είναι ο λόγος, ούτως είναι εν αρχή προς τον Θεόν, πάντα δι' αυτού εγένετο, και χωρίς αυτού εγένετο, ούτε εν ο γένονεν. Εν αυτό ζωή είναι, και η ζωή είναι το φως των ανθρώπων, και το φως εν τη σκοτία φαίνει, και η σκοτία αυτό ου κατέλαβεν.
Lovely. So just take that first line for us, the first verse, because our people, most of them will have heard this.
Yes.
NRK logos kai ho logos ein proston thean.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning was the Word.
Mm-hmm.
Word was with God.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The Word. Tell us about NRK ein hologos, because our listeners can follow that. NRK, the RK, the Archimedean point,
Mm-hmm.
arc, the
Mm-hmm.
the beginning. We use archbishop,
Yeah,
means
yeah.
arch rival. These words, arch means somebody who has foundational authority,
Yes.
exists in, and then of course
Yeah.
logos in arche was the logos. As a Greek,
Mhm.
someone who knows Greek, a Greek speaker, a Greek reader, when you hear logos, how do you process logos?
Yeah. These are both really big words, right? Um, they're both really big words. So as you said, archi is we translate it as beginning, but this word connects it means beginning, and it means the rule, right?
Mm,
The kingdom, the foundation, the empire. Um, it is a very big word. Um, the word logos as well, as I'm sure, I'm sure everybody has heard this before, but um, oh wow, it's a philosophical word, right? Um, in Plato's dialogue, it means the argument, right?
mm,
Um, it means the argument. It means um, um, the process of thinking,
mhm.
the
It can mean
word,
read.
the reason.
Ah,
Yeah. So right, even oh, and the word in, the imperfect of the word to be. As you said,
mm,
this implies time, right?
mm.
In the beginning, there existed, the word. Um, yeah, even in those three or four words is so much to unpack there.
And so when we translate it in English, we have to choose normally one word, a word for
Right,
word translation.
right, right,
So we
right.
choose the beginning, but it could be the foundation of all things. It could be the rule.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes,
it's the same word in the Septuagint for Genesis 1:1.
yes,
God, in the beginning, God created. And
yes.
then as you're pointing out, logos, there's not a single English word that
Hmm.
that really captures what comes into your mind when you read this word logos. It's packed,
Hmm.
strange. It has a history, and yet our English translators have to choose one word, and we normally choose the word word.
Yeah, yeah. The word,
But
word,
but
the
there are
word,
other
word.
word like where's rema? Rema is the typical word for word.
Hmm. Right.
Right? So
Right, drama. So here's the thing. I think that some people might want to study Greek because they think, I really want to um, figure out precisely what that word was in the Greek and what it means, and I'm going to get all the answers to my questions here. And
mhm,
I think that people will find, and that's a good,
mhm,
that's a really good desire. Um, but I think that people find, at least I have found this, that going to the original opens it up even more. It makes it less precise and it opens up more questions.
uh,
Um, for the first reason is a lot of times the Greek word holds more, right?
mm,
Um, and also, sometimes the phrasing is more ambiguous in the original than it is in the translation. And that's another limit of the translation, is
mhm,
that sometimes the translator has to say, well, I'm just going to choose this one instead of this one. But, a lot of these texts, this one especially, this is inspired text. Maybe it was meant to hold both,
yeah,
right? Right.
that's that's so important to note that there's a richness that's available and accessible in the original, such that, especially with poetry, but with other kinds of literature as well, something is lost in translation. And so I guess
Right.
there's a lot of reasons to study Greek, but one reason might be to recover what is lost, because you want
Yeah.
that you want that
Right.
treasure. I'm going to hand it over to you for the lesson, but with one last comment. A
Right.
friend of mine said that he teaches Greek, and he says, I think it would be really helpful. This is He kind of made it a goal of his. What if 5% of the church was familiar with Greek? What would that thought that that might just be helpful for the preservation of the Christian faith if 5% of the laity, not just our pastors,
Mm-hmm.
could
Mm-hmm.
access the New Testament anyway, and maybe the Septuagint in Greek, um, because there is this richness, this treasure is available, and it takes some work, of
Right.
course,
Right.
to access it. But wouldn't you want this treasure? And
Yes.
and it just seems that throughout the centuries, that's what Christians have thought. I want to know my Lord in His Word, in the words that were given to us.
Right.
And it was
Right.
Not the only reason to study it, but that certainly is for especially for Christians, it's one compelling reason. But
Right.
I'm going to pass it over to you now. What do you want to talk about?
I
What
want to
would
talk about all of this. If it's about Greek, I'll talk about anything. No, this is wonderful. Um, I want to talk about what you just said, actually,
Mm,
which is and something we alluded to earlier, which is more people used to learn Greek, right? To be able to hear the gospel in the church and to understand it, and to be able to interact with all these texts that we're talking about. So what happened? Like, well, why aren't we doing that anymore? And I have come to see this as true. I have come to believe that the answer to that is it's because we stopped learning it as a spoken language. And
uh,
I really believe that's true. I think that we changed our pedagogy, and because of that, we lost the ability to learn the language efficiently. And I think it's one of the reasons why we all think that ancient Greek is so hard. Um, and to be fair, it's not hard, but it's
mm,
not as hard as we make it out to be. And while it's certainly possible, I mean, I don't mean to disparage any of the good work that's done at universities and seminaries. And, it's certainly possible to learn Greek using the grammar translation method, and
mhm,
people do it. But it doesn't work for everybody. And it takes more of an investment. It takes more of investment of time.
mhm,
Um, Whereas the spoken method, because it works with the grain of how we naturally learn and memorize, we're able to come up the curve quicker.
mhm,
Um, and so that's what I wanted to. I didn't want people to trust me on that. I wanted to kind of show, well, what is the spoken method, and what does it mean when we talk about this direct method. So let me see how to do this. I'm going to share my screen. Are you up for getting involved here?
Of course.
And where is this share screen? Okay, hold on. Okay. Do you see my screen? Does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this, I have to say, this is a lot easier in person. Okay. But I try to figure out how could we're a little limited here. It's wonderful that we can be together, but I had to adjust this a little bit considering that we aren't all together. So here I have this. This is me. This person right here. This is teacher,
Mhm.
Didaskalos, and she walks into the room, and this is what she sees. She sees this person like this, and she says, "Anastathi, Anastathi," and this is what he does. And then she says, "Gatison," and this is what he does. Okay, so again, she sees this, Anastathi, Gatison, oh, Gatison, Anastathi, Gatison.
Kathison.
Mm-hmm. So,
Anasti Kathison.
Christophore. So you're Christophoros, right? Which
Si.
is a beautiful name, right? Um, Christ bearer. Christophore. Anastathi. Carissa. Carissa. Gathison. There you go. There you go. So I didn't use any English there. Of course, I used some English in kind of setting up the situation, which I wouldn't really have to do if we were in person, kind of explain these images. But I never translated. I never said this is what this means in English, right? And this is and this is what it is. I never gave that equivalent. All I said was anastathi, and I showed you what it was, and katison, I showed you what it was, and you were able to mimic that. And I'm sure that if I said anastathi to each person on this call, that they would be able to do that. So anastathi, and there you go, anastathi, katison. Great. So if we were if we were learning by, the more typical grammar translation method, this isn't the first word that we would learn. This is an aorist command. Gathison is a regular command, but anastathi is also anomalous. It's an irregular aorist command. However, if you are a child, right, learning Greek, right, learning language from your parents in your home, from your siblings, your friends coming over, it would probably be one of the first things that you would learn. Anastathi, gathison and eat your food. Gathison and listen to me, right? So this is what we're doing. We're kind of following that natural progression of how we would learn, a living spoken language as a child, right? You want to do a little more? Okay,
Sure.
let's do it a little more. A little more. Okay, so now the teacher sees this.
By the way, I have to just say that when you say anastasy is Anastasia,
Yeah.
which is a standing up, which is
Hmm.
the resurrection,
Yes.
which is anybody who's named Stacy is so there's these lovely etymological family relations, and Cathison is related to the Latin cathedra, which means a seat that you sit on, etc. So
Yes.
I don't want to get
Yes.
there's
Right.
these
Right.
fun little stories that are embedded already in these words that you're teaching us.
Yes. And right. Anastathi, Gathison as well, but especially anastathi, it is such
Mhm.
a loaded theological word, right? When we have, if your faith tradition is Orthodox, we have Lazarus Saturday coming up, and when Jesus is talking to Martha, and she says, your Lazarus will arise, and she says, yes, I know he will arise in the resurrection. This is the word, right? And so already, just the first minute of class, right? You're learning anastathi, and you won't forget it. I bet, I bet each of the participants here in a week, if I said anastathi, would recognize that word. And part of it is it's hearing it, it's seeing it, but it's also using the body, right?
Yep.
When we use our body, it's just another input. We're not, we're soul, we're not just soul. Like learning things in the abstract is not, it's very helpful when we bring it and make it concrete and we use our body as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to remember that. We're going to remember anastathi and kathisan, right?
Mhm. And by the way, you're using this is multimodal. This is just a fancy word that sometimes teachers use. You're using every mode except for our nose and mouth at the moment, right? You're using
That's
all
it.
three. We're,
Yes, yes.
we're
Well,
up.
and that's another very good point that you just brought up is we don't speak first, right? And a lot of times when we're learning languages, we expect students to express something, but that's not the natural way that we learn languages. Anyone that's learned a foreign language knows that we understand it way before we can speak it. And so, I just demonstrated anastathi and gathison, and I never asked you to say anything, right?
Mhm.
But I was able as a teacher to confirm your comprehension, right? You showed me that you understood, and you don't have to speak. Um, and so the spoken method also follows this. We understand and we do things first using the body before we ever speak. And then we speak before we ever write, right?
Mhm.
Well, first before we ever read, and then before we ever write, right? The writing just comes, that comes last, that comes late. And then of course composition, right?
Mhm.
And then translation, which is a skill in and of itself, right?
Mhm.
And requires, the art of elocution in both languages,
Mhm.
right? So that would be the final thing that you would do in this sort of communicative approach.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so yes, yes. Okay, so let's see. The teacher sees this and she says, "Lave ton kalamon. Lave ton kalamon." And he does this. And she says, Tes, Don Calamon.
Mhm.
And he does that. So again, she says, La ve, Don Calamon. Tes, Don Calamon.
Mhm.
La ve, do poterion. Tes, do poterion. Again. La ve, do poterion. Tes, do poterion. La ve, do vivlion. Tes, do vivlion. Autis, again. La ve, do vivlion. Tes, do vivlion. Ah, okay, you ready?
Ready.
Do you have a calamon? If you do, la ve ton calamon. Calista, calista. Tes ton calamon. Calista. La ve do vivlion. Calista. Tes do vivlion. Do you have a poterion?
Hmm. Un momento.
Calista. La ve do poterion. Okay? Tes do poterion. Wonderful. Wonderful. So how does that feel, by the way?
It feels good. It's kalos.
Carlos. Mhm.
It's natural.
Mm, mhm, mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
Right.
So I get it. I mean, I see it too, and so it's I really enjoy the combination of the visual, the oral, and the kinetic, just
Mhm.
all working together.
Yeah, yeah. And it feels playful too. And I think you know, I see kids love to do this. They love to use their bodies, they love to get up, they love to move. This works so well with kids, it works so well with boys. And there's so much you can do here. You know, you start playing with the spider, with the ball, and throw me the ball, catch the ball. And all this without any speaking. They start speaking when they're ready. And then when they're ready to start speaking, there's so much you can do there as well, right?
Now,
Getting them to describe and conjugate verbs. I'm catching the ball, I caught the ball, she's doing this, you're doing that. So there's so many ways that you can use your body, right? And then I also feel like this works really well for older people, because it doesn't rely so much on, the children really have an advantage of being able to memorize much easier than we do.
right?
But this helps us, right? This kind of evens things out a little bit.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
it requires an adult to kind of, as you put it, be playful, like to become
Hmm.
a little childlike again. And
Hmm.
you find that, or even older students, like I, s- I can certainly see how like teaching, an 8 or 9-year-old, they're just going to follow this joyfully. But what if it's a 16-year-old? What has been your experience? How do you help a teenager to enter in, or maybe you find that it doesn't require much help at all? They just jump right in.
Right, right. So as part of Atiquizo, the apprenticeship program that I lead for Cersei, we have two in-person retreats a year, one in July and one in February. And we recently had our February winter retreat. And so I have apprentices the age range, it's amazing. I love it so much. So my youngest apprentice is probably, I don't know exactly how old he is, maybe in his mid 20s, all the way up until I think mid 60s.
Hmm.
And we read the gospel every morning in the original and talked about it
Hmm.
in ancient Greek. We did Aesop's fables. We worked through our curriculum, which is Athenadza. We did a little bit of church fathers. But here's where I'm going with this. Every day we played a game. Um, After lunch, we played games, and a lot of those games required you to use your body. And my two older children were also at the retreat as well. So I've got that teenager, the one that rolls her eyes when I ask her to do things. And the games were by far the best part of the retreat. I mean, by far and you could see you could see that everyone was enjoying it. Something magical happens, I think, when you're playing a game. And I I think it's a lot of reasons. I think it's because it's restful. um I think it's because in these games, you're setting the student up for success. You're not asking them to do something that they don't know how to do. They know how to do it, and then they do it, and that feels good, right? When it's a very joyful feeling when you do something that you're able to do. It's
Hmm.
rewarding, and that's another thing that I really like about um this approach is I feel like it's rewarding all along the way, right?
Hmm.
um where you feel that progress that you're making. um, so yes, I think adults really like to play games, and I don't think we play enough of them. Right?
Hmm.
Right.
Now, what about? And I don't want to sidetrack you with the lesson, but you're using the Greek alphabet here in your slides and illustrations. At first, there might be a few people on this call right now saying, "Well, oh boy, that looks hard. Like I don't even. Did she say that was Biblion? Where I don't see an L.
Mhm.
How do you go? What is it like to teach the alphabet, and how should new learners be intimidated by the alphabet or not?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, in an in-person beginner class, I would not have any of this written.
Mhm.
Because it's just important to hear the sound. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how it's written.
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
i i I always loved it when my children first started writing, and they would put things together and you realize they had no idea they were separate words. Like they would write thank you as one word because it's like thank you,
Mhm.
it's just one word. And it doesn't matter, they understand the word thank you. And then later you learn, okay, well, what are the pieces here, and how do I read it, and how do I write it? So yes, if I were in person, I wouldn't have had this written here. It would only be about hearing it and learning lave this, right? And just
Mhm.
and just hearing that first, and then later learning this. Um I teach the alphabet. So it's not hard to learn the Greek alphabet. I think it can seem intimidating to people to learn the alphabet, but there's less letters in English. There's not too many, diphthongs. There are lots of resources on YouTube to learn the alphabet. I
Yeah.
teach it as just phonetically,
Mhm.
and then just ask people to read words after teaching the sound. A
Mhm.
lot of saying and imitating.
Mhm.
Um, I an adult could probably learn that the entire alphabet and how to read in an hour
Mhm.
lesson. Yes. So yes, people shouldn't be, intimidated by the different alphabet and the
Yeah,
different letters. Yeah.
I agree. In fact, now I wonder how often. I bet you're probably more disciplined than I would be, because you know Greek so well. I would expect that, like, just to go back to anestheti again. You're hearing and associating that imperative command with John 11, Lazarus Saturday, the general resurrection. You're the name Stacy, and probably
Hmm.
I mentioned those things, and you're probably thinking of five others that are just starts circulating through your mind. Don't you just want to start telling those stories to your students?
Yeah.
How do you control yourself, and how do you pace students? Because I'm thinking of the curse of knowledge. If you know too much Greek, you might try to teach too much Greek too soon.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do you?
I always you know, and people ask me about this sometimes. Do I know enough? Do I have enough experience? Do I have enough knowledge to teach this? And I always say sometimes it's the beginner teachers, the teachers that are only one lesson ahead that
Mhm,
are better teachers. Because, for this reason, yes, they can't answer, some of the bigger questions. And then you just say,
mhm,
okay, I'll look that up. But the beginner teacher, first of all, has a lot of humility and remembers what it was like not to know these things because they still don't.
mhm.
And I think gives the right amount of information for the lesson, right? As you just said. Um, so I do think that's a benefit of, when you learn something, go ahead and share it with someone immediately. Like you will learn it better and you will do a good job teaching that. But the other thing I wanted to say was I grew up speaking modern Greek, but ancient Greek is different.
Mm,
It is different. I have a really good friend who's Greek, and she's Greek from Greece, and she's so funny. She's always like, "Oh, I can't believe you know ancient Greek. It was so hard when I was in school." She went to school in Greece. That's where she grew up,
mm,
and my parents had to hire a tutor for my sister because she was failing ancient Greek. So, in other words, it's the same language, but it is different. It is quite different, and so.
mm,
Um, I don't want people to say, "Oh, well, you learned it, but that's because you already knew modern Greek." And it doesn't work that way. Like you still have to learn it. And I honestly think I've come up the curve quickly on ancient Greek because of the approach.
good.
Um, so yeah, so I've lost track of what you said that made me remember that. But I did I want to make that clear
Yeah.
um
Well, I'd
as
ask
well.
about like teaching too much. You
Yes.
and
Yes.
so your last comment makes me think of analogy in English. Like if you know English as your mother tongue, you probably will get to Shakespeare pretty easily. It'll take some work, and you probably could go to Beowulf in
Hmm.
Saxons. So it's not English. It's
Hmm.
it doesn't have all the romance words, the Latin words coming into it, but you're at an advantage if you know English to go to kind of that proto English Beowulf
For sure.
recently.
For sure. For sure.
Well,
Yes.
before we leave, just tell people again about what you're doing. You're teaching. We are great friends of Cersei. We love the Cersei Institute and what they're doing. And I just want everybody to know how they can find you if they want to and know more about where you're teaching. So things that you just would want to say to people who are either watching now or may watch this video later. How can they get in touch with you? How can they find out more about you? How could they study with you?
Yes, yes. So yes, so I'm the head mentor for Atikizo, which is the 3-year language apprenticeship program. It is a spoken apprenticeship program. We have 2 in-person weeks a year and then weekly webinars, 1 hour a week, weekly webinars, which I think that the design of the program is just brilliant for learning languages. You can do it without, changing your whole life. You can learn Greek without devoting all of your time to it, as long as you're disciplined to do a little bit every day. But it's not just online. The in-person makes it a real community.
Mhm.
And it makes it possible to do a lot in terms of immersion that wouldn't be possible to do just online. So this hybrid program is just wonderful for learning the language. We are accepting applications for the class that will begin this July 2024, this summer. And yes, I think that hopefully there's a link to the program where people can find out more information and ask questions about it. I always love to hear from people directly if people want to email me directly. And and ask me questions about the program or about teaching Greek in general, I would love to hear from you. And if there's any questions this evening, I would be happy to take any questions.
Let's do that. So, Joylyn, we'll just turn it back to you, perhaps, if there's some questions that have come through that you might want to highlight for Monique. Let's hear them.
Well, I stood up, sat down, picked up my pencil, put it down, picked up my mug, put it down. I'm going away enriched. Thank you.
Oh,
It's fabulous.
thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you.
one question it's come through is you were making the observation that spoken Greek and modern Greek and ancient Greek, you're like, it is different. And as someone who did 1 year of seminary with, biblical Greek, um, I wonder if you can expound on that a little bit in what should someone expect, such as myself, that maybe I wanted to dabble in a little spoken Greek or otherwise, or vice versa. Why the difference and what difference could be expected?
So, Attic Greek is the Greek that was spoken in classical Greek in Athens at the time of Plato. And uh, so the language has Homeric Greek. We call it Homeric Greek because that is Homer's Greek,
Mm,
an even earlier form of the language. The language basically simplified over time. So Koine is a simpler version of the language. Um, and then, it simplifies further over the Byzantine period, and then it simplified further and became modern Greek. It is still the same language, but it is much simpler.
mm,
Um, but it's recognizable as the same language. And if you know modern Greek and somebody reads you Attic Greek, if you know modern Greek and somebody reads you the Bible in Koine, you can probably make out a lot of it, maybe 75%.
mhm,
If you know modern Greek and somebody reads you Plato, you're going to make out very little of it, but maybe some, 25%.
mhm,
Um, so in Atikizo, we teach Attic Greek. And we teach Attic Greek because it is the more complex form of the language. And if you learn the more complex form of the language, then you get Koine as well, right? You don't exactly get modern Greek, but you have a path to getting it. But if a lot of people say, well, I'm going to study biblical Greek because I want to read scripture and I want to read the church fathers. You really should study Attic Greek because the church fathers didn't write in Koine. They wrote in the higher, older form of the language. They wrote in Attic Greek. And the church fathers can be difficult. And so if you study Attic Greek, you have a much bigger toolbox. You have everything available to you. And then it's just about learning the different dialects and okay, well, this is kind of what's different about Homeric Greek, and these are the words that he uses, and these is kind of his forms. But it's easier to kind of jump to everything else once you have a good foundation in Attic Greek.
mhm.
It's fabulous. And I think maybe the final question, unless anybody else wants to pop anything else in the chat or the Q&A box, but would be, the premise of this talk was just taking down the intimidation factor a little bit. And some people are just automatically fascinated, interested. I know I was talking with a friend about Dr. Perrin this morning, and we were talking about you cannot hear a Dr. Christopher Perrin talk without etymology of a
That's
language,
so
that there
great.
is going to be because there is something so illuminating about the source of words in their original language and so forth. So there's something intriguing, and I'm sure even our guests, there's probably quite a continuum of those who are just completely enamored with Greek and are all in, and those who are like, I'm curious, but I don't know. So, do you have any final words of exhortation or passion or intimidation, dialing down that you want to share with anybody those who are maybe on the continuum of their Greek journey?
Right, right. I honestly think that the method makes it it Greek really does become accessible. And you know, I read I read the gospel every day with my children in Greek. And they're young and they haven't been studying Greek for all that long, and they have come up the curve. And that's not their Greek studies. That's just we get to enjoy the gospel in the original, and talk about it. And this is a passion of mine. I want other people to be able to do the same thing. And I think that's possible. And for the people that want that, I would say, go ahead, go ahead and jump in. Right.
Mm. I would just add that it's, you can learn, you can and be blessed by these languages, Greek, at any time you start. She mentions she has somebody in his or her 60s studying with her, right? But
Yes.
what a gift it is to encounter these languages, if possible, when you're younger,
Hmm.
uh, because you were pointing out that when we're young, we acquire language quickly, and so if you have a younger child who could start, while in elementary school, it's not. It's the as I mentioned, I started when I was 18, but I wish I'd started when I was 8,
Yeah.
like Rebecca is.
Right.
So,
Right.
uh, and not to
Right.
not that we have to beat ourselves up if we can't do that, but what I'm just back to that. What if 5% of the church population anyway knew this language? What might that mean for our churches
Yeah.
to have not just pastors, but people in the congregation who were studying at in the original.
Yeah.
I think it would be a blessing to the church. But then, just to mention, to know Greek is going to do about 10 things that are good for a child at the same time. That
Mhm.
that child won't be able to be processing, but it's going to be enhancing one's ability to understand English, one's ability to understand another foreign language because of the logical, regular structure of the Greek grammar. It will be preparing them to walk through a number of doors in the professions.
Mhm.
It prepares you to think whole to part to whole, to think clearly, accurately, to do puzzle solving, which is what we do if you're a filmmaker or a scientist.
Right.
In other words, there's a kind of mental discipline that is really valuable whenever you're working in a foreign language. And then it's just connects you to a community, as Monique's been pointing out, uh, of people who have gone before us, church fathers,
Mhm.
the biblical writers, the ancient Greek writers, and all of those people who knew those writings. I remember once talking to a young high school student who was studying Latin. She said this about Latin, but it's true of Greek as well. I asked her, I said, "Why do you keep studying Latin? Why do you enjoy Latin so much?" She says, "I feel a vibrant, real connection with people who lived well over 1,000 years from me. They have become my friends, and I cherish this community that I have, and that's just a pleasure." And then I'll just stop with this one last comment. C.S. Lewis says something about the schoolboy learning Greek, who, when he's first learning it, might have to do it for rewards. He writes about this in The Weight of Glory, but he doesn't yet fully understand that the time is coming when there's going to be great pleasure
Mhm.
that uh, it only grows. And what I appreciate about this method and how you teach is that I think you do something that C.S. Lewis did not, or something he didn't experience. In other words, he learned Greek when he was young too. I think he started, when he was, around 12. But he learned the grammar translation method. It was hard it wasn't pleasant for him. It became
Mhm.
extremely pleasant. And he said, "I'd give my right arm to know Greek." But this method seems to bring pleasure to the learning right from the beginning. Children can experience a measure of pleasure and joy, even when they're just starting, because it's
Mm.
how natural it is. So I'm a fan and wish I had been trained this way, and I wish I could teach this way, but can't.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
so glad to see you doing what you're doing, and I just
Dr. Perrin, I think you're not alone. We had someone pop into the chat to ask this one question also. Does the apprenticeship include one-on-one time with you, Monique, or is it only group classes? Because I think your method is compelling. Can you speak to that real quickly?
So I probably should have mentioned this, but the apprenticeship is small, and we keep it small um, because it's based on a mentorship model, and it's based on having that relationship with a mentor. So my current class has 6 people. Um, and I will probably take 4 to 6 people in the next class. And so, even with that addition of the second class, we're still going to be very small. Everyone is together for the retreats, but then each class has its own call. So the first years have their own call, the second years have their own call. We just started this program last year, so we only have 2 years. Next year, we're also going to have a third year class, but each class has its own call. So even though the webinars are as a group, the groups it's small, and so everybody has an opportunity to talk, to participate, during that 1 hour. So there is a lot of, even though it's not exactly one-on-one, there is a lot of interaction with me in the program, and with the other apprentices. And then at the retreats, the first years also have, the second years now as mentors, um, and as additional people that they can learn from. So it's a really well-designed program, and I love that it's small for this reason.
mhm. No, it's
Well, if you have other questions or intrigue or so forth, we do invite you to enjoy the recording that'll be sent out to anyone who registered, and you'll be able to explore more with the links that will come along with that. And that will include the link to the Circe apprenticeship. And if you're interested in children's Greek, you can also look up our Song School Greek that I happen to know a very quality author of that as well. So, Dr. Perrin, any last words from you?
what comes to mind is thank you, Joylyn. Is what is a nous? Uh, this comes back to Lewis again. And it might be in a weight of glory, but he says, what a nous is. It is he says it's not what you don't want to say is that it is a ship.
Mhm, mhm.
A nous is that which sails upon the waves and catches air through its sails. That's what someone who knows Greek thinks a nous is. They don't think a nous
Mm,
ship.
right.
A nous is a nous.
Mhm,
Strikes me that this method does that from the beginning. You know, you
mm, right.
this is a column,
That's right.
right? It's not a pen unless you're happen to be speaking to English people.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
it's a column, and the
that's
Lord
right.
stands you when you say column. This is column.
That's right.
So
Yes, I love that. It's calamos and it's a pen, but calamos and pen are not equal, right? They both point to the same thing, right? Yeah, that's beautiful.
well, yeah, it's been great talking with you, Monique, and I hope that this recording is going to be inspiration to some children and others who are going to be studying with you and acquiring this language in the years to come.
Oh, it
So,
was just a delightful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
oh, you're very welcome, and thank you, Joylyn, for hosting and setting this up.
Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you again at our next live learning event. Thank you all, and good night.